Well, Errol Morkoc joins me now from California to discuss Netanyahu's takeover plan, plus President Donald Trump's decision to meet Putin and what to expect from that meeting. He is a Republican spokesperson. Let's understand how the party views this planned meeting. Good to have you this weekend, Errol. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his government's plan to take over Gaza City is the best way to end the war and defeat Hamas. And what's your assessment of his comments amidst global condemnation of a takeover plan?
Well, he is certainly doing what we expected him to do based on his entire career. Bibi Netanyahu has never, ever pretended that his end goal wasn't to effectively move everybody out of Gaza and claim that territory. Now the question is, what does this mean? Is this going to be a humanitarian effort in the sense that Gaza has gotten so bad due to the bombings and the nonstop isolation that perhaps the only way to bring food and actually come in there would be through military means? Or does he actually mean that they're going to go in there and start a ground war against the remaining cells that are Hamas? Both are going to result in extreme loss of life and continuation and perpetuation of the conflict in Gaza. And that's the opposite of what the Republican Party and the opposite of what Donald Trump wants. Now, that's not to say that Donald Trump hasn't said things to the effect of go and finish the job, but that term that he uses oftentimes is referring to the terrorists specifically, not to go in and make this a bigger humanitarian crisis. So I guess the answer to the question is the Republican Party and Donald Trump see this in both lenses. You can see that Donald Trump has pushed back against Netanyahu in regards to the starvation, in regards to the situations in Gaza. So this is something that doesn't have the full-throated support of the Americans, but it is Israel's territory and it's their war. So we're hoping that they act in good faith. But right now it's a very bizarre circumstance as the situation only is getting worse despite everything that we throw at the problem.
Yeah, when you say that is their war, it's obvious the U.S. president is, literally backing Netanyahu. Like you said, he says, go finish the job. But then when Netanyahu talks about taking over and not occupying the Palestinian city or Gaza city, how does that kind of plan work?
Yeah, it's a plan that doesn't have a lot of precedent because the concept effectively requires the ethnic removal of all of the Palestinians from that area if it was to be successful. I mean, the differentiation between Hamas and the people who have Hamas has under their rule is something that Israelis haven't historically made a very good differentiation on in terms of collateral damage. There's been a lot, regardless of intent, and so I mean, there's no positive solution if that is going to be the only next step. I think what we have to have here is leadership from President Trump, bringing in the Arab nations that are willing to be good faith actors here, and also having just some sort of humanitarian compassion, because I understand Bibi Netanyahu wants to win a war, but there's also innocent people and children and starvation there. So there's no real blueprint. In fact, it's even confusing to escalate it in this situation. Who would you be fighting? What's left to fight? It's a little bit of a catch-22 for everybody involved.
Now, when you made reference to, the people of Gaza, moving and all of that, that's the same ethnic cleansing that a lot of people have made reference to, which Netanyahu himself and others who are in support of this have continuously denied.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because it confuses me. Because based on just the definition of what this is, if you take a group of people and you don't kill any of them and you buy them all private jets and fly them to a new area and give them five-star service and then say you can no longer come back, that's still ethnic cleansing based on the concept of removing an ethnicity from an area. The idea that it has to be bloody and followed with genocide and all of that is, I think, where the Israeli and the American governmental pushback is. They're not trying to equate this situation with, because the next step on ethnic cleansing is genocide. And so it's very bizarre to me that people fight definitions the way they are. In a lot of ways, it is an ethnic removal. And people use the term cleansing because it is much more visceral and sounds much worse. But removal and murder are two different things, and that's probably the definition that the governments are trying to separate in when they play this sort of words game. But between normal people, in terms of definitions, it's hard to deny the definition. But I think the term cleansing is what runs into genocide, and that's what they're trying to step away from.
So now, should the world also take Trump's silence as agreeing to a takeover plan by Israel? I mean, you've made reference to the fact that what he's obviously saying is deal with the terrorists, but to take over seems like, I mean, I don't know how that is viewed as a party, what's his silence over that? Because that's happened in a couple of days after Netanyahu spoke. We've not heard anything from Donald Trump.
Yeah, I think it's one of the situations with President Trump is that he conducts so much of his diplomacy in public. In fact, the majority of it, that if any of it is conducted traditionally, which would be not on Twitter or with the live media camera crew in the Oval Office, then we jump to the conclusion that he's not involved in the decision making. And I'm very well, aware that he is, and that there's a backdoor, not a backdoor, a traditional channel of communication, and it's simply not in the news. So certainly President Trump is involved in this decision. He's involved in trying to, not the decision, I'm sorry, but involved in trying to influence the decision. He's a humanitarian. I think that the idea here is that it's better to do it now with the Israelis and the traditional channels versus how he's been doing these bombastic sort of blow-ups where he's trying to rearrange things. This is something he's trying to sort of keep together, and that might explain the different media approach that the Trump team has here.
You're just, seeing that a lot of lives are involved here. You would expect that, being a humanitarian, he would speak to that situation. But then let's move to the Trump-Putin meeting. Attention has been drawn to where this meeting will be held, which is Alaska. How symbolic is the location of that meeting?
Interestingly, there's a lot of symbolism. Russia used to own Alaska. And additionally, the nearest point of Alaska to Russia is 2.4 miles. It's our third closest neighbor besides Canada and Mexico. So I think symbolically and also legalistically, it's the reason for it. There's a ICC arrest warrant out for President Putin, so some of the other locations maybe would have been circumspect in that regard. Alaska, obviously, they feel is, very neutral in terms of the Americans aren't going to arrest President Putin, obviously, and also the Russians are right there. I think it's a safe location to meet, and I think it's symbolic in the sense that it is where the Americans and the Russians have found agreement before in terms of land and transactions and deal making. So maybe we can look at it like that. Either way, that the fact that they're meeting is positive in the symbolism towards peace.
Now, do you think that Putin is being rewarded for doing absolutely nothing? A lot of critics have said that this is more like a reward for someone who hasn't, put forward any concession.
Yeah, a lot of critics fail to, I guess, account for the fact that Putin is the leader of an incredibly sophisticated military that has won its war objectives nearly, I'd say 80% or so. And so you're not dealing with somebody who you're rewarding. This isn't like how we deal with the Taliban or how we deal with these tin pot, crackpot dictatorships around the world. This is a country with fifth generation stealth fighters. This is a country that can go to space, that has men in the space station. This is a country with hypersonic Mach 10 ballistic missiles with multi-entry, six-prong warheads that can hit six different targets. So we're not talking about like some guy who's getting rewarded. We're talking with a guy who's legitimately feels that he is, and through the results of his actions, has earned a seat at the table where Russia has always had a seat at the table, the negotiating table. Whether they were our allies in World War II or whether they were enemies in the Cold War, it's always been a country that's too big to ignore. It's too powerful. I mean, it's the fourth largest economy in terms of purchase parity, in that sense. Like, it's not a poor country, that they sort of Western media masquerades it at. It's just a different economic situation over there. And I think we need to be very well aware that we're not rewarding anybody. What we're trying to do is end a war. And that means that we have to entice President Putin to come to the table. I mean, or else he can continue this indefinitely if he'd like to.
Sounds like there's nobody, it sounds like, Zelensky isn't being considered here. But when they talk about land swapping or conceding or ceding, a territory, just like Trump referred to in that video just before we spoke to you, You wonder what territory is referring to when Ukraine isn't occupying Russian territory, rather it's the other way around. Now, also, I want you to answer that real quickly with, Trump threatening sanctions that were to expire September, but move the date to, August 8th. On the expiration of that, nothing happened. So, that's the reason why some people feel this is a Putin win here.
Well, I would say that ultimately the sanctions didn't really cripple the Russian economy like we had hoped to. I would say, yeah, to some degree it is a Putin win. Putin didn't fold over the minute that President Trump was elected. He simply kept doing as he wanted to. He was very polite, but kept his bombing campaigns up and kept pushing to take the territory. I think when you talk about a territory swap, it's important to realize that the swap will probably be Ukraine retaining some of their own territory. Not that they would get, imagine you're trading your own chips that the other guy stole from you, and he's allowing you to take some of that back and calling it a land swap. So in every single situation here, as far as the east of Ukraine goes, they've lost this war. The only way to take it back would be millions of lives and billions and hundreds of billions of dollars and escalating a regional conflict in the eastern part of Ukraine to what would be a global nuclear war. And that's not what we're here to do. And, if people are going to criticize us and say that, we're letting Putin win or this or that, we'll take the criticism if the criticism comes to a peace agreement.
Now, a trilateral, conversation is what a lot of people are looking forward to, and we know that Trump has said he's looking forward to that as well. But first is a Trump-Putin conversation. Let's see how that plays out in the coming days. Thank you, Errol Morkoc, for joining us from California.